Congratulations, first and foremost, to Jayden Daniels, the third LSU Tiger to win the award. Joe Burrow, of course, in 2019. Billy Cannon back in 1959. He got 503 first-place votes, 90.5% of the ballots. That means 9.5% of voters did not have him in the top three. That seems odd to me. That is the seventh highest percentage of ballots in the history of the award. 75% of the points is 13th all time. He is the fifth transfer quarterback in the last 7 years to win the award. Michael Penix finished second, 292 first place votes, about 300 some change points behind. And then actually I was surprised, a distant third, Bo Nix, with just 51 first place votes. And even further distant fourth place, Marvin Harrison, with 352 total points behind, obviously, Daniels, Penix, and Nix. And then Jordan Travis, much highly touted on social media, fifth place finish by the Florida State Seminoles social media team.
I love everyone's like, oh, now Florida State's okay with
No.
fifth. I'm sure that's not making Florida State fans feel any better, but I mean, it was a good joke. Yeah.
It's pretty funny. They're out there touting fifth place. It's pretty funny. It doesn't make it feel any worse or any better that you got left out. 85 points, 8 first place votes. Jalen Milroe was on 57 ballots, finished sixth place. Ollie Gordon, your Doak Walker Award winner, finished seventh place. He was on 27 ballots. Cody Schrader was on 25 ballots. Again, there's about 900 voters, so I'm trying to give you some context here. Blake Corum, of course, with 3 first place votes, finished ninth, and then J.J. McCarthy, 1 first place vote for J.J. McCarthy, and finishing 10th place. So just number one, first, your reaction to what actually happened, the voting itself. I'm curious if you think the Pac-12 championship game swung Michael Penix into second place over Bo Nix, or if you think that gap was already so large that Penix was well ahead of Bo Nix. I'll explain my line of thinking in a second, but I think it kind of finished about how I expected. I think Jordan Travis, probably deserved more votes had he stayed healthy. I think Jalen Milroe deserved more votes. I could see Corum and Schrader being totally worthy as well. So I don't really have a problem with how it all shook out. And I think Jayden Daniels is, with the numbers he put up, the statistical production and the sort of outstanding electricity of entertainment value and carrying a bad defense to a lot of wins. I don't know, pretty deserving player relative to, Robert Griffin's and Lamar Jackson's and Johnny Manziel's and guys that didn't even win. Caleb Williams didn't even win his conference last year either. But that electricity and that statistical production and the outstanding nature of the season, I think, makes Jayden Daniels a worthy Heisman winner.
Yeah, I thought the voters got it right here. If I had a Heisman vote, it would have gone to Jayden Daniels at LSU. I just think we could run down the statistics. They're all impressive. The big plays and touchdowns, the rushing performance, the total passing yards, all of it. It's all impressive. The eye test was impressive this year. I know that says most outstanding, but just watching him carry LSU to this point of the year, I know they fell somewhat short of preseason expectations. Just the whole package there, he was well deserving of first place for me. I think the Pac-12 championship game did have some influence on voting. I wonder if one of those two quarterbacks, if they had a stronger performance in there, might have been enough to maybe close that gap to number one. I thought Penix was good in that game, but let's just say he threw for 6 touchdowns. Would that have changed the voters' mind? Right. I think it might. I think that that might have been enough. And I think watching that game, if you were a voter that was on the fence and you probably didn't watch enough of these guys during the season, it may have just swung you to voting for Jayden Daniels. But I think it certainly helped. Even if that's not the case, it certainly helped Penix finish second, I think.
If you are a voter and didn't watch a lot of these guys during the season, you shouldn't be a voter.
I have some bad news for you, Braden. That's the case for a lot of these voters, and I don't mean to. So let me call anybody out, but
I guess I was the gap that sort of surprised me was between Penix and Nix in second and third. Not surprising that Jayden Daniels won. He won relatively easily, but also Penix was a pretty solid close second. The gap that surprised me was the gap from Penix down to Nix from 2 to 3. Here's my question: if Nix had done something crazy, I'm curious, is that gap because of Penix's win in the championship game because to your point, it was Dylan Johnson and the defense that carried that team to a championship game win there in that situation. Now Penix was totally good in the game, totally fine, but like the Dylan Johnson was the star. I'm curious if Bo Nix had done the 6 touchdown thing and gone crazy, would he have finished second or won the award? And my instinct is that Penix had already established himself well ahead of Bo Nix before that game. But that's just my assumption looking at the numbers. Like I don't think you can make up double the vote total gap by one game. Does that make sense?
I think you can though. I think basically I'm going to put myself in the mind of some of these voters who probably didn't watch all these guys this year, and they said whoever wins that game is probably going to be second on my ballot or first. Like the winner, the quarterback and the winning team, and assuming they have a good game, was probably just going to be the default option by most voters in there. So I think if Nix had a huge performance, I think he would have finished second. That to me, that like whoever won that game, the quarterback was going to finish either first or second. And depending on how you felt about Jayden Daniels, depending on how you felt those two quarterbacks played in that game too. So I would disagree with you a little bit on that. I think that people probably flipped or made their decision based upon that game.
I mean, it was 6-1 first place votes, Penix to Nix. I don't think you can play one football game and change 5 out of 6 people's minds. So I don't know about that. I see your argument. Here's the thing. They're all deserving, by the way. I want to be clear. Like,
yes,
if you argue Penix, that's fine. If you argue Nix, that's fine. If you argue Harrison, I think that's totally fine. Like Jayden Daniel, I think they're all, much like the committee for the playoff, I think they're all deserving.
I don't know how much weight to put into the like Heisman straw polls that we see from various sites, but I do know a lot of them had Nix ahead of Penix at some points during the month of November. So again,
I don't know how much that counts.
Take them for what they're worth. Yes, to your point, they're all very deserving. Yeah.
What would you? Because I used the championship game as a tiebreaker, but in a very different way. What was your ballot if you had a ballot?
Would have been the same 3: Daniels, Penix, and Nix.
Okay.
I would have wrestled with putting Marvin Harrison at 3. But like to your point, they're all very deserving. But I felt pretty strong about voting Jayden Daniels 1.
So I'm going to ask you who you would have voted for if you could not vote for a quarterback. Because again, so many people complain about the award, and I think it's still the best award show build up, the hour long spent. Like you call it cheesy if you want to, but I still think it is the best award show in all of sports. It tells great stories about background and family and the teammates and like the work. Like I just think it's still a great show. Like it's still a great piece of content about these great athletes. And so you can kind of be the cynical, jaded old guy who's like, oh, it's just a bunch of quarterbacks. And that's fine. But like, and I get it. I understand. And I'm going to ask you, if you had to vote for 3 non-quarterbacks, who would you vote for? If we were going to try to change the system and make the award more appealing to more positions, who would have been on the ballot this year? Certainly, I don't know if any of them would have been more deserving than Jayden Daniels if you watched football at all this season. So what do you think? What do you think my ballot was?
I think you voted Jayden Daniels 1. I think you voted Bo Nix 2 and Marvin Harrison 3.
Man, you do know me. It's not 100% correct, but it's close. It's close.
Wow.
Jayden Daniels 1, Bo Nix 2. So you got that right. And I had Jalen Milroe at number 3. I just thought the most sort of unstoppable individual at the end of the season. And you can say Alabama played poorly against Auburn and that was a miracle throw, but guess what? It was a freaking spectacular play, and making spectacular plays to save your team's season, it matters. He was dominant against LSU. He was dominant against A&M in the second half. He was on the road. He was dominant against Tennessee. He was dominant against Ole Miss. He was dominant against Georgia in complete control of the offense in the second half against number 1 in a championship setting. He was dominant on the road against Kentucky. He was I think he was arguably the most unstoppable singular player outside of Jayden Daniels in the entire country. So that's why I put him at 3. Now, I did use the championship game as a tiebreaker, but that's because I have watched all 25 games that the 2 players had played, Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix. It was if Bo Nix was going to do something spectacular in that game and beat Washington to win his team a championship, because I felt that Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix were even. This is much like Texas, Alabama by the committee. Texas and Alabama, even resumes, even seasons, both champions, both 12-1, basically even. What's the tiebreaker in the committee's eyes? Head to head. I was using the Pac-12 championship game as a tiebreaker because I thought Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix were basically even. I thought Bo Nix was the more spectacular player than Michael Penix. I thought I just thought he was. His passing numbers were as impressive, if not more impressive. His completion percentage, his efficiency metrics, they're off the charts, and they weren't a bunch of dink and dunk throws. They're down the field throws. He also brought more to the table in terms of versatility and athleticism, in terms of what he did with his legs. So I had him tied going into the last weekend. And then because Bo Nix and couldn't get the job done against Washington, that was my tiebreaker. And I went Jayden Daniels 1 and Bo Nix 2 and then Jalen Milroe 3 because of, in large part, how he played against Georgia. But if you're asking me who are the best 3 players in college football, I might go Marvin Harrison 1, Brock Bowers 2, and like Joe Alt number 3. So if I had to ask you who is, give me your non-quarterback ballot. You cannot put a quarterback on your ballot. Who are the 3 guys that would have deserved to have been in the conversation this year?
I think. Well, I'm going to back up for just a second.
And you can react to Milroe too, by the way. If you
want. I was going to say on Milroe, I think you're going to be a year ahead of the curve because he's going to enter next year as the favorite. So I would think you might be voting for the Heisman winner at number 3 a year early. The conversation around the Alabama-Auburn game sort of annoys me when we talk about the playoff, and it's just totally different. But using Alabama doesn't deserve to be in because of that game. Then let's talk about like Michigan and Maryland. Let's talk about Texas and Kansas State. I could go on
and Houston and TCU and
right.
Yeah, Florida State and Boston College. Like we can keep going. So
right, it's a ridiculous notion. But anyways, to your question, back on track here about 3 players or so. I thought about this and I came with a couple guys, but I also think that there's not the Will Anderson of this year. I don't think
right.
There's like, it's not like a dominant guy I can point to and say he needs to be on there as a Heisman finalist as a defensive player. So I'll throw out a couple. Peyton Wilson from NC State, the linebacker, had an outstanding season. He's been banged up a lot, healthy this year, was outstanding all year for a very good NC State defense. T'Vondre Sweat, we've already talked about the Texas defensive front, a guy that, and I think this is true. Interior linemen will never probably get the recognition they deserve unless you're just sitting there watching them consume blocks and let the linebackers flow to take tackles, or however, that's sort of more of like football watching tape thing. Cooper DeJean at Iowa, he was hurt late in the season, but whether it was punt returns or defensive plays, he's in there. I'll throw out 2 more. You already mentioned one of them, Joe Alt, the tackle from Notre Dame. And he was hurt some this year. But if we want to start thinking ahead till next year, I think Travis Hunter, Colorado, all around, we've seen Charles Woodson has some success with this.
Yeah.
That kind of playmaker defensive back may get involved next year.
Helps to have a large solar system sized black hole gravitational force as a head coach as well for media attention. That certainly helps. He did win the Paul Hornung Award for the most versatile player. I think you could put Cooper DeJean in that category as well. If you're doing non-quarterbacks, it would be Marvin Harrison 1, Brock Bowers 2, Joe Alt 3, I think, for me. If you're saying non-skill players, right, which is another layer to take, then you're taking away Bowers and Harrison and Cody Schrader and Blake Corum and Ollie Gordon. If you're doing that, it might be like Joe Alt number 1, Cooper Beebe at Kansas State, the guard number 2, and then I think I might go T'Vondre Sweat number 3. I think Jackson Powers Johnson, the center at Oregon, who won the Remington, is in this conversation. Olu Fashanu at Penn State is in this conversation. If you're going just defense, I think my vote would be T'Vondre Sweat 1, Peyton Wilson 2, Xavier Watts 3, maybe safety for Notre Dame. So like again, there wasn't that Aiden Hutchinson and Ndamukong Suh type of defensive player this year. I mean, Dallas Turner is a phenomenal player, and he's not even haven't even mentioned him yet. So I don't know. I mean, Latu at UCLA is another name you could throw out there. Jalen Green at James Madison. I just don't know to the people who are so upset and up in arms about this award being only given to quarterbacks, I just, outside of Marvin Harrison and Brock Bowers, who both play offensive skill positions, doesn't make them any less awesome, by the way. I don't know how you get this away from the offensive skill players this year. I don't know how you do it.
I agree with you. I do have some frustrations, I think, with how extensive the voting panel is here. And it does seem to me that there are, not to be mean, a lot of people who don't watch college football year have Heisman votes. It's a very large group of voters, and it is very unusual to me to see some of these names on the list. I think it is good to think a little bit outside the box when it comes to Heisman voting, and that it doesn't always have to be quarterbacks. We have seen, like you said, Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson, and Ndamukong Suh, Charles Woodson. So when there have been those type of top flight defensive players, they have gotten in the mix. So you have always been champion the defensive players, offensive tackles for the Heisman Trophy for, I mean, as long as I've known you. So I think we could be smarter and maybe a little bit more open to positions outside of quarterbacks, but it is also going to be hard to not give it to a quarterback, which is the most important position on the field too.
I mean, midway through the season, my ballot would have been Brock Bowers 1, Marvin Harrison 2. And then Bowers gets hurt. And I still think those are the best 2 players in college football. They're better at what they do than anybody else. And so should I have voted for Marvin Harrison first? Maybe I should have. I don't know. Like, it's hard. And again, I thank you for, not including me as one of the people that doesn't watch the games and doesn't take the award seriously. But I also hear a lot of fans and old head media people. They're like, oh, the award is just a bunch of, quarterbacks and it's not that serious. It's a popularity con. Like, no, it's still something for those of us who still love it the way I did when I was a kid. I'm super honored to have a vote. But it's like, again, this year, I don't know what we would have done. Like, again, can you go to Jackson Powers Johnson, who is the best center in America, who gave up 1 pressure on like 361 snaps of passing or whatever? Like, how do I sell that to the country as a reason to vote for someone? I'm just one guy with 1 vote. I do agree that if you trim the sails, you probably get a better, a better result, but I don't think the result changes all that much. And so
I don't think it does either.
Like, again, I mean, Edgerrin Cooper at Texas A&M, like, is he worthy? Like, okay, he's an All-American caliber linebacker, but is that a guy that do I think is worthy of being the greatest player in the sport this year? I don't know. So I really do struggle with it, honestly. Like, I am torn by 2 halves of, like, yes, it does feel like it's becoming a certain type of award, but also, like, the award ceremony is great, the TV show is great, the content is great, and I think the award is still the best award in all of sports. It's the best individual award in all of sports. So I don't know, if you allow yourself to just, like, enjoy it for what it is, I think you can watch Jayden Daniels pretty obviously and be like, dude, that guy was insane this year.
Yeah.
Like, who else can you say that about in college football this year?
That's the other side of this is, and I think we kind of hinted at this. If you don't vote for Jayden, like, who was more outstanding or deserving than Jayden Daniels? And we mentioned the names that we talked about, like a Peyton Wilson, like a Dallas Turner, Tavondre Sweat, Jackson Powers Johnson. Like, none of those, as good of players as they are, would have gotten a Heisman vote over Jayden Daniels for me. Now, maybe like Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson, like in some years, would they have been one for me, depending on who was, yeah. I hope I wasn't being mean by saying too much about the Heisman voter roll. So Braden, feel free to give me a hard time. But I do think
no, not at all.
I think we have a pretty extensive voter list, which is good. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know how I don't, some of the voting and names are a little curious to me. I'll just leave it that, so I don't get us in any kind of trouble.
Sure. And I think what's interesting is, like, are you gonna, like, the argument for some of these players is different, right? Like, like, I think Cody Schrader, if you want to vote on a story, Cody Schrader at Missouri is one of the greatest stories in the history of college football. Truly. Like, his story is fantastic. Like, he goes from Division II to, like, walk on because a booster wants to pay for a building, and he ends up getting a scholarship and then ends up as an All-American, finishing second in the Doak Walker, and is a reason that Missouri has one of the best seasons in the history of their program. I think Blake Corum, 24 rushing touchdowns is nuts, but he only rushed for 1,000 yards this year. But if you want to vote for Blake Corum and say like it's kind of a career award for him, 3 straight Big Ten championships, you know what I mean? Like, okay, your argument for Blake Corum, who's totally deserving, is more about a career achievement, right? At that point, if you're voting for Marvin Harrison, it's because he's the best player, which isn't necessarily what the award's all about. So again, and there wasn't an elite defensive superstar that stood above the rest this year. So I understand the desire to tweak the award and change it to some degree and try to make it more inclusive to other positions. I've always struggled with that. But like if I was the guy who put Joe Alt #1 and Peyton Wilson #2 and Marvin Harrison #3, like that's a headline across all aggregation news websites on the internet the next day. Like, who's this one guy who voted for the Notre Dame tackle? Like, that's going to be a story. And I'm not saying I wouldn't do it because of that. Like, I don't care at all. But like, do you see what I'm saying? Like that,
Yes.
like that. I could get my ballot removed for,
Well,
which maybe is part of the problem.
I think one of my biggest problems this year with the voting was when I looked and saw Blake Corum get 3 first place votes, JJ McCarthy get 1, Ollie Gordon got 1 too. I guess you could argue that each one of those in their own right had a reason to be voted 1. It just seems those were kind of odd to me for first place votes. Now, did it matter in the end? No. But I guess in this discussion as we're talking, I'm still not on one side of things. I do want to see more defensive players, offensive linemen get recognized for this award, even if we went on a nationwide campaign to get Peyton Wilson Heisman votes. I don't think it would have mattered this year simply because Jayden Daniels and Michael Penix and Bo Nix were the 3 best quarterbacks in the country this year, and that often translates to winning the Heisman.
Right. No, I tend to agree with that. Again, like Ollie Gordon led the nation in rushing, but like 1,600 yards. He was a great player. Like there's no question about it. I think Cody Schrader was the more worthy running back of all the running backs. Like again, from a story standpoint, he accomplished something I don't think any SEC player has ever accomplished. Right, 200 rushing, 100 receiving, and he did it against a top 20 team in Tennessee where they destroyed a team and sort of made a statement defining their season. So I don't know. If I put Joe Alt, Cooper Beebe, Olu Fushanu, and Jackson Powers Johnson on my ballot, I could do all 3 linemen and it'd be fine. I would be fine with that, voting for that, you know?
You would certainly get a lot of
right
attention if you wanted to raise your Twitter follower count, I guess.
But then everyone says that's the reason you did it. Like, not because you really want to see offensive linemen get more exposure. It's like, no, you just want the clicks, man. And it's like, well, maybe I just think Joe Alt was the best player in college football.
Right.
Like, maybe that's what I thought.
I think we often say this. 2 things can be true. Offensive linemen, defensive players probably deserve more love for the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah.
But in a lot of years, they probably still wouldn't have won it. And even no matter what we thought coming into like this voting process, or no matter how many times we talked about it, it wouldn't have changed, I don't think, the final outcome this year. So while I understand some of the critiques and the complaints that you were mentioning early on, I would agree with them, but this year I don't think it mattered. Like, and maybe it matters next year if somebody just has an awesome year and maybe you're laying the groundwork for more people to get comfortable voting for a defensive player. Think back to, I don't know, it was the 90s. There was always the talk where you can't vote for a freshman for the Heisman Trophy. Like there was a certain
exactly.
order. Like those things like should just go out the window. Just vote for who you think the best players are, and most of the time they are going to be quarterbacks.
Bryant McKinney finished 8th in 2002, the Miami offensive lineman. I'm pretty sure Orlando Pace finished pretty high in the voting, I want to say. Yeah, Orlando Pace finished 4th in 1996, which is incredible, by the way. So an offensive lineman finished 4th and a defensive back won it in back-to-back years. Which is really interesting. Although, interestingly enough, in that 2002 voting, or 2001, excuse me, when Brian McKinney finished 8, you also had Dwight Freeney and Julius Peppers finishing 9th and 10th. But again, we're talking about 8th, 9th, and 10th here. You know, like it's still just quarterbacks and running backs, and even rarely does a receiver. I think Fitzgerald finishing 2nd in 03 was like a total anomaly. So,
yeah, Devonta Smith, of course, winning just a few years ago.
Right.
By the way, on Jayden, first of all, on Orlando Pace, if you want a little bit of nostalgia and you want a fun Heisman moment, his Heisman Trophy campaign ad that he did was about making pancakes. Of course, being a lineman with all the pancakes.
That's right.
It's one of the cooler Heisman promos. But also, I think if we just take a second and we step back and think the fact that 2 LSU quarterbacks have won the Heisman Trophy in the last couple of years is insane to me, considering where they were offensively under Les Miles and how prehistoric their offense was at times.
Good. That's a good point.
And now Joe Burrow and Jayden Daniels have won the Heisman Trophy. That's pretty remarkable. And also, I think just think about where Jayden Daniels was as a freshman at Arizona State, and think about how much he improved from there to LSU, and also from LSU first season to second season, because there was too much talk. He wasn't aggressive enough, and now he's won the Heisman Trophy. So credit to him, obviously, for all the hard work to get to this point.
And of course, both transfers. 5 of the last 7 winners, transfer quarterbacks. Ndamukong Suh finished 4th in 2009. You had Manti Te'o finishing 2nd in 2012. You also had Jadeveon Clowney finishing 6th that year. Jarvis Jones, you remember how good Jarvis Jones was at Georgia? Yeah. He was like that short, kind of undersized hybrid off the edge guy as well. So they're like some of those defensive players have had some interesting years. I'm just looking through the voting here at top 10. Scooby Wright, remember him? At Arizona as a sophomore, had like 160 tackles and 15 sacks, finished 9th. 164 tackles and 15 sacks is good for 9th in the voting. So I don't know what that means. That was before I had a vote.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think guys like Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson would probably have a good case to win it in some years, but are also like, who's that quarterback that season too? Yeah. Probably like this year. Would Will Anderson, if he had the dominant season, would he have been pushing Jayden Daniels for the Heisman? Yeah. I don't know. Probably not.
Chase Young finished 4th in 2019. Yeah, Jonathan Allen, way back in the day for Alabama, finishing 7th, I guess. But yeah, you're right. Like 2021, Aiden Hutchinson finishes 2nd, and Will Anderson finishing 5th. So there you go. There you go. Okay, there you go. That's just some history, some philosophy, and some explanation on the 2023 Heisman Trophy. Congratulations to Jayden Daniels.